You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Okay, so I guess we're live. So this is 3 Enoch with Robby Marx continuing his series, and of course my boss Nick, Mr. 33 of the Occult Rejects.
Love it.
So yeah, we were talking a little bit about well, Robby always we could record right away pretty much, and it would be pretty interesting, I think. But I brought up the idea of the Hecalot versus Merkaba literature, and I think that actually brings us into 3 Enoch really well. So I'm gonna let Robby introduce what the book is, how it relates to the other two, and sort of its place in the greater, we'll say, Judeo-Christian mysticism or canon. And obviously if Nick wants to jump in, he can do so. So that's pretty much it.
For sure. So now the third book of Enoch, or Enoch 3, is the Hebrew book of Enoch. So this is actually temple literature that claims to be written about 100 AD, but the scholars say it's most likely written by highly trained rabbis from between 300 to 400 AD. And it's mostly fragments that they've gathered from different sources and kind of seen together. It was in 1928, this Dr. Hugo Ottoberg, PhD, gathered the various fragments, publishing the first full transition of the gathered fragments with the source Hebrew material as far as the actual fragments. And that book actually got and he didn't make very many, what I've got here somewhere, he only made a very limited 6 or 7 of these books, or maybe it was in the teens, but nonetheless, one of them sat on this shelf in a library in Chicago for years and years and years, and nobody even knew it was there. And he kind of traced it down and found this book, this guy Lumpkin, Joseph B. Lumpkin. But he gathered, because there was more fragments that they had found, and then he found this old book from 1928 by Ottoberg, and kind of brought that into the modern edition that we have now, that is Enoch 3.
So, okay, so let's, so in which ways, Robby, is Enoch 3 related or maybe very dissimilar from the first two?
Yeah, I think that these were essentially books that were independently created during different time periods, all based around the character of Enoch, that basically show this night vision that Enoch has into him being physically translated into the heavens and not having to die. So they took that base character, and basically you have the the Ethiopic book, which is probably the older, then the Slavonic, and this is the Hebrew. And now with this one specifically, it's not specifically about Enoch. It's more about a rabbi. It's written by a rabbi who became a high priest after he had an ecstatic vision of his ascension into heaven. So this is Rabbi Ishmael. We're looking at 90 AD to 135 AD. But a lot of people believe that it wasn't written by him. It was written 300 years later by other trained rabbis. And basically it's a pseudofigural work in the sense that it says it's from a time that it's not, and it says it's by an author that it's not. But this rabbi, he basically, very much like Enoch or the various night journeys we have, through all of the histories. Every prophet basically has a night journey. This rabbi, he has a night journey, and he goes up into the heavens and basically gets to ask Enoch questions. So that's what the Hebrew book of Enoch is really all about.
Lucky bastard gets asking questions.
Yeah.
What would you ask him if you could ask Enoch a question, Robby?
What would I ask Enoch?
Yeah, if you had one question to ask Enoch.
Jeez.
I put you on the spot now, didn't I? I'm sorry.
Yeah, man. My soul would probably just leave my body, and I would be like on my face on the floor. I wouldn't be thinking about questions so much, man. I mean, the way that they describe this, they're having, in some ways I could compare this to some psychedelic experiences in regard to DMT. But at the same time, these ecstatic kind of prophets, we can trace back all through history, from the Sibylline prophecy to the ecstatic Kabbalah, to the divine madness of Plato. It's something that's been a consistent factor in history, that these people have these out-of-body experiences where they have some significant thing that happens to them in the outer realm, and they come back basically with information of the the outer realms.
So one thing I thought that was really interesting that Nick asked you that question was because I was thinking this actually makes sense that it's about a rabbi and not specifically Enoch, because it is the path of the Zadi, the saint, the star, which is that path between Yesod and Netzach. So it is like the star card. And and so it's very interesting to me, just like it's relating that it's the every magician, rather than it's not just about some mythical Enoch. It's saying like, you can do this, you can be Adam Kadmon too.
Right.
You just have to like have a little bit of understanding when you're reading it, not project like how people do. They're like, I need to worship this figure in the text, but no, the text is actually saying, no, this is about you. This is your
about
story.
you. Yes. Oh, very much so. Very much so. And yeah, it's just I think that this divine ecstatic experience is a part of the human experience, and what was it, Carl Sagan, he said everyone's a star. So in regard to the star,
every man and woman is a star.
What's that?
Every man and woman is a star.
Yeah, 100%.
Crowley,
yeah, exactly. Crowley said it is, and then you have the Astrum Argentum, the silver star. It's So I think that this whole thing is a natural part of experiencing the divine within the mortal body, within the mortal coil.
I think that's really interesting in terms of the Hecalot versus Merkaba mysticism question. Like in Buddhism, we would say, well, in Tantric Buddhism, we would say the mind palace is something that you carry with you through time and space. Like it is your mind. So the Merkaba is also you, just as in the more medieval Kabbalah, you are the spark. You are the spark that travels through the paths. But maybe in the original idea, it's more of a it is less agential, meaning like you have less agency, you have less free will. Maybe you're less luciferic. You're not so luminous in and of yourself. You're reliant on the experiences of both gods and demons.
Right.
Because the timing fits, Robby, I'm sure you've already noted this, is that it fits perfectly with the second Babylonian Exodus.
Yeah.
And my sort of proposition, or something that I've been thinking about or working on, and I'm speaking about since your first episode on the show, is the idea that this is really a kind of pseudo Zoroastrianism or Zoroastrianism at a schismatic point
Very
that
much.
the rabbis, who are high IQ people because of the memorization and sort of mysticism involved in Judaism, were able to see the Iranian tree or the Persian tree or whatever you want to call it, and they were able to sort of copy this into what later became like the Zohar and all of these texts. So I think that they're also speaking about like there's sort of a maybe a metaphysics that run through, but it doesn't necessarily have to even agree with each other. Like they don't have to be, they can be like different factions, different schools, different ideas happening sort of at the same time. And there are different even ways of reading like the 3 books of Enoch, just like there are different ways to read the Gnostic texts.
Or the Bible, you know?
That's right.
Yeah. And then to some people, the Bible is a very Gnostic text in regard to Jesus seeking Sophia, you know? And you know, when you get into the idea of the star and the connection between the star and the angel in regard to them being synonymous with each other, just different words for the same idea. And then you look at the ancient Zoroastrianism. Zoroaster was the one that came up with the beginning and the end, which is where we get into this end times apocalyptic kind of philosophy. Zoroaster was also the same one that said that every person had their own individual angel or quote unquote guardian angel that watched over them, that every town has an angel, every city has an angel, every country has an angel, every, you know, and then you have the world itself with the angel that's over the world, which is Samael, you know, and but Enoch himself is the Lord of the earth. So he's over Samael. And he actually pleads for the earth because he is a human. He's basically the human that's allowed to come into the divine ratio as the witness of humanity. Whereas Samael, you know, the rule was kind of passed to him because the humans were so out of control. You know, so you have this dialectic of almost this, and Samael is in the higher realms of heaven, even though he's a fallen angel, and Enoch basically is the human element that pleads for humanity, while Samael kind of is this kind of more negative entity that's still in the heavens. So it's interesting just the way it all kind of lays out.
Well, and it also goes back to a discussion that you and I have had, that Nick and I have, like basically every show, is this kind of dialectical relationship that happens between Gevurah and Chesed, because that's what Samael is. He is like the left hand of God. He's like standing there, flame shooting out.
Yep.
Like, you can only temper it with what? With our action in the world, which is supposed to be mercy.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a really interesting thing, because there clearly are differences of opinion in how and where you're going on the tree, and like where your terminus is. Like some people, like Nick asked me on to do a show with Heidi Love. It was really great, actually, like really phenomenal, I thought. And
yeah, it was fun too.
Yeah, and really informative. And so she was talking about how Joseph Smith had like a knife of Mars and a pentacle of Jupiter. And I think it was actually a pentacle that protects against poverty, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I think that's what it was. Or a pentacle for protection in general, which are also Jupiterian. A lot of people, I mean, maybe the three of us know this, but a lot of people don't know that. There's like a very ferocious, powerful, smiting, some would say, element of Jupiter. So it's the sort of extremes of how we view them. So if we say like, oh, Mars is like more malefic, more evil, more fiery, but like Nick always says, it's just change. It's just change. That's all it is. And you know, you can drown in water too. So like you can over apply mercy. You can be over merciful. Yes, that's totally possible. And you can actually cause more suffering. So the idea is to like not be either extreme.
Yeah,
Sort of like
yeah.
balance it all out, you know?
For sure. And that's what, within ourselves, we have to learn to understand these different things and work to balance them within ourselves. And, I was talking to this Jewish cat over in Port Chester, New York, and he was basically using Kabbalah most specifically for his own internal workings and balance, which again coordinate out to the stars within those planetary elements that are incorporated within the different sephirah of the tree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting because I was just talking about this morning, is that how astrology in a tantric way is not astrology about even the stars. It's really an alchemical methodology to like look at the certain inflection points of karma in your life and then be like, okay, how can I fix this like thing doesn't look great? Like, how can what are my workarounds? What is my, like, you can say magical system? Like, what are the specific tools that I can use to, fix this thing? So it's very much, I would say probably it's interesting that this book narrates more of the human's journey, because there's also this idea in Messianic Judaism that God gave us like humanity, the world, like it is ours to do with whatever we want, whether good or bad. Like it's totally up to our free will, sort of.
Right. Well, and that was when you get, and even within this text, we see again that the angels, the angelic classes, are very unsatisfied and upset that God had brought this mortal that had been born by a human into the divine higher realms in his physical form, for the night journey. And they're like talking about they can smell the blood of the woman from his birth. They're talking about, that basically he's a polluted entity from the earthly realm. And, so this is a consistent scene that we see from the creation in Eden, when basically God asks Lucifer to bow down to the newly created man, which was one of the reasons for his fall, to the end of the idea of Enoch, where they're still upset, and God basically has to say, I gave my love to him, and you're just going to have to deal with it. So, which led, I think, in the beginning to the essential fall of a third of the angels from the heaven in regard to the mythology,
Well, I think that there's clearly, like we were talking about chariot versus palace literature, but I also think there's maybe even a third distinction you can make in some of this, which is more of that Luciferian, and I'm not using it in like a negative way, but the one that's relating like the journey of the man, but it's not necessarily the man as the hero. It's more of like that idea that I spoke about, the Zadi, the sort of magician. It's really, that's what it is. It's the magician's journey. And so we talked about this in the last episode, like about how Joseph Campbell's monomyth doesn't quite fit the magician.
Right.
It never quite fit the magician, because we're just too fucked up. We're too we're too wild. I don't know.
Now
it's just, we don't really fit. So, but there is like a story for us and of us. It just is maybe more a little more transgressive. Like 3 Enoch, you were saying, is maybe more of the transgressive side of the 3 Enochs. I know they're not inherently related, but they have a metatextual relationship.
There's definitely some transgressive issues within Enoch 3. And now the names of Enoch, they call it the third book of Enoch, but they also call it the book of palaces in relation to temple literature. So and it has many when you get into the Hebrew words, you also have to understand that Hebrew and the structure of the letters and the meaning behind the words, oftentimes a single word will have multiple meanings entailed within it. So within the transcription, within the translation effort, it's hard to sometimes pin down some of these ideas with going from Hebrew to English.
Yeah, so this is really interesting, Robbie, because something I think about with like Tibetan and Sanskrit is
Right.
that there's a very there's like a lot of people have looked at the similarities between Hebrew and Sanskrit. It's not just me, but maybe less so have looked at the sort of like ways that liturgical or tantric Tibetan, so there's more of like a formality, how Tibetan is used to translate tantras from the Sanskrit, but sometimes tantras are actually originally written in Tibetan. So there's this idea that maybe you can encapsulate magical knowledge in translation through languages that aren't necessarily related by family.
Oh yeah.
If you use secret methodology.
Yes.
So I kind of think that I'm already open to that. So, but I understand what you're saying. But Teresa asked a really good question in the chat, and I'm not used to going live next, so I'm just going to do a little Kabbalah lesson.
That's awesome.
I guess.
No, go for it, please.
Yeah.
So yeah, Gavura is usually associated with red, is a great color, but it has like it's a very orangey red. It's not like a scarlet red. It's much more of it's a flame red, so it looks like fire.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's actually the traditional red people would think of. I would agree with that.
And yeah, so I appreciate that. And Nick agrees because, like, obviously I defer to him, but
you shouldn't.
there's a yellow and a gold, especially in Tantra. We would say there's like a yellow and a gold, also kind of quality, maybe a density of it. If you think of it like a jawbreaker with different sort of crusts that have different colors, that's probably a good way. And then, or Russian nesting doll, I've heard other people talk about this metaphor for Kabbalah. It's pretty good as well, because you can kind of imagine the dolls as different colors, different weights. They all have different sizes. That's very much like what the Sephira are. And they all fit into each other. So there's this idea that each center, like the center doll, the smallest doll, but the densest doll, should also be like pristine, the quality of ice, diamonds, or lightning. So this also goes along with the idea of what Robbie was saying. And so this idea of ice, diamonds, and lightning actually relates to chesed, or the other pillar, the blue pillar, because that is really the essential color of that pillar is clear. However, in Jewish mysticism, as well as in Tantra, they express it in the color of turquoise. However, turquoise isn't really turquoise. It's not really blue, but that's when it becomes more a hermetic idea, you have to concretize it into reality. Turquoise is not, it's just a much more uncommon color. People aren't going to always understand that turquoise means clear. So they kind of say that chesed is blue. But I think maybe Nick would agree with this. There's kind of a quality of lapis, lazuli, and then there's a quality of turquoise. And both of those are hesed. So it's not either or. It's kind of like a weird sphere that you can say is blue, but it like with Gavura, it's not really red. But yeah, that's generally the color people say.
Yeah, I mean, you also will even get like the green sphere on the bottom going towards chesed on the right pillar. So like you could even see, like what were you saying, turquoise? You can see that.
Turquoise.
Green and blue. And then something that you're actually, I have to say, I'm really impressed with the way you know this a lot, because I've noticed it either like when you're on your own post or your own show. Each sphere does have 4 different colors. I always just kind of refer to the one that is just used on the sphere. You do kind of, I've noticed, pay attention to the other ones. And I normally don't notice that stuff, but there is like 3 other colors besides what's normally used that could be associated with that sphere. So I guess what I'm saying, when it comes to symbolism in the Kabbalah, like so many different colors and you could be playing around with it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that what hit me, Nick, was when we did our show like a million years ago about Pink Floyd, I realized, like when Lisa was talking about synesthesia, I realized that I actually have a little bit of it. And it particularly happens with colors, but not with music. It actually happens with words. So, and I feel I've spoken, obviously I've had Sachki on my show a few times. He's a very advanced Kabbalist, as well as like a physicist and a mathematician. So he also has a little bit of this, but his is more musical, whereas mine is more associated with words. But I realize that it probably is maybe a relatively common experience with people who study Kabbalah or Tantra or magic in general, that you'll just start to associate, like maybe you'll see colors. Like I don't see it all the time, but like I'm sure this happens for Nick, and I'm sure it happens to Robby. Like, 'cause if you look at colors or you're looking at reality all the time, you begin to like, notice, I guess, little things. But what makes me notice the other colors, Nick, is not so much my skill or anything. I appreciate that you say that. It's really that it's other people who are using Kabbalah in the world, you could say. They kind of mix up the colors. So whenever they do things, they add the colors in a weird way. I find, like, for me, it's weird. I find it like it's because it's not book ordered. It's not like pristine. I kind of look at it like, what are they doing? So that's more how I deconstruct it, is like I try and look at it the way they're looking at it rather than the way that I think about it.
Right. Well, and I think just like the various spheres have the different intonations of quality and color, very much like the Hebrew words themselves have different quality and meaning in regard to the multiplicity of the whole.
See, that's such an important part about Hebrew mysticism in general, just because like every letter, even the way the strokes, like just like in Chinese, like the stroke count matters. This is something my grandparents would say to me, like until I was like, they would slap my hands until we could like write them properly, like really. And so they would always be like, stroke count matters. And then you become an adult and you realize, yeah, it actually matters because it changes the whole way the letter looks or the word looks. And so in Sanskrit, this is also true, is that every little stroke, it has a color, has a number, has like a little vibration, has like a wavelength, has other associations. So it becomes like very complex just with single letters.
Right. And if you look at the idea of the alphabet and letters in general and trace that back through the evolution of the alphabets, those original hieroglyphs per se that developed into the letters, those hieroglyphs themselves have fundamental understandings of explanation of the cosmos entwined in the symbol itself that we've kind of lost within the modern, vernacular of business English,
Well, vernacular is an interesting way to sort of reframe us. Sorry, I derailed us off of Enoch 3. My fault. I'll blame me. But I think that because the languages are different, and like Robby was saying, can you perfectly translate like something that's gematria complex? Maybe because I'm not TJ, right? Like, I can't just do it like that. But can you translate something like that into English? Well, I think that I would make a case that you can. Now, am I the one to do it? Definitely not. But,
but I think the creation of the English language itself, when you go back to Chaucer and you start to look at the creation of new words and William Shakespeare creating many new words in the English language, I think that the foundation of the English language itself had very magical beginnings and had, a lot of mysticism kind of woven into it for the purpose of creating the new Atlantis,
That's a very interesting idea that I've actually been playing with, and like other people have been talking about it and thinking about it, is this idea of like the new Aztlan. Like this, like I call it Hapaboria, obviously from my training, right? But I think the more proper term is a new Aztlan. So like this kind of reforging of like this pre-Diluvian, I guess they would say, Atlantis, but it's on America.
Right.
Yeah, I do think it's kind of interesting, especially right now. Like, obviously, I don't really talk about the news that much, but like there is some really interesting like dialogue. Like, does Canada belong to the U.S.? Is it like forged in our manifest destiny to like be part of this greater world island, you could say, or the turtle's back? Because the turtle is, in fact, all the way down the tip to Mexico. That's the tail, right? And the head of the turtle is actually at the Arctic.
Yes.
So is that the manifest destiny of America? I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting idea, like what you're bringing up and then how it relates to right now.
Yeah. So now when we're looking at Enoch, right? And we talked about the Hebrew words but it also has Greek and Latin words mixed in with it. So it becomes kind of this slurry, this melting pot that's, very much like America, how you're having kind of Babylonian philosophy and Greek philosophy and Roman philosophy and kind of all that culminating into, the time that this kind of was compiled and kind of used as a sacred temple, palaces kind of text.
Do you think, Robby, that do you think my idea is crazy about the idea of the mind palaces being like palace literature is about it in your mind,
right,
or at least in your sort of container of the material universe, like your kingdom, your little home, whatever it is, or and the Merkaba is more about you have to physically, or you go somewhere. So you go somewhere higher in the cosmos.
Yeah, I think the mind palace is something that we all carry and can develop into, giant palaces full of rooms, very much along the lines of Bruno Dijon, Bruno, the alchemist that got what's his last name? But he talks about mind palaces and the creation and how to create this memory palace, basically Bruno Dijon. And then you have the idea of the Merkaba, which, the mind is something that we tap into. It's not necessarily local. It may be related to the magnetic field. But then as far as the Merkaba, the meat suit that we all carry around is our Merkaba that allows us to function in three-dimensional time space. And it's flesh, so it's going to decay. So we have a limited amount of time in the various, Merkabas that we potentially could take on,
One thing I thought of, Nick, right away was when I was reading the 3 Enoch, about the description of Enoch and like his how his eyes explode into flames,
right?
But it's not just his eyes, it's like it's quite specific in like the various kind of like organs around the eyes. And they're all flames.
Yeah, the eyebrows are actually made of the original material that put life into things within the three-dimensional realm. And basically they burn hotter and meaner than any other part of reality, So, and it's basically the energy that holds up the pillars of foundation is what his burning eyebrows are made. And then his eyes are like lightning. And
that's right.
Yeah.
It used very mixed. It was like very Hesed Gevurah metaphors, like flaming and then also lightning.
Yes.
Like Vajra and flame at the same time.
Yeah. And his limbs were made into like coals of burning juniper wood. And it just, the descriptions, it's just, you really, if you want to get the full flavor, you kind of, because as this rabbi is going into the heavens, and he's going to, meet Enoch, he goes through, and what's interesting is, you have the other 2 texts that talk about rising through the different mansions, whereas in this one, the rabbi talks about he goes into a hole, and then the next heaven is another hole inside of the hole, and he ends up going through 7 holes before he gets to the point where he can see the highest heaven. So it's this almost like a black hole within a black hole within a black hole within a black hole, and it's quite interesting visually in the mind.
It's interesting to me because it is like very Sephardic, like obviously they're negative space. Like I'm using the idea of the nesting dolls, but it's not really the nesting dolls. It's actually like the air in between each one that really is the Sephra. But you have to use an outer container, a klipa.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way to describe it, right? Or to an idea, at least a word to hold on to it.
Right.
So there's this idea that, like, yeah, the sevens, this expansion. I noticed that was the number for this episode was really about sevens, 70 years. Enoch or whatever. I forgot the exact line, but he says something about 70. It's very clear that this is the number to be aware of. This is like the calendar system that they're talking about. And I just think that that's very interesting because it's very Shakta Tantra, right? Like it's very like the yoni. There's 7, sort of expressions into finality, I guess, or into eternity. That's one way to describe it. And one way into the diamond. But it always is the 8th. It's always dependent on that secret. There's always like a secret one. That's this real trick of iconography, right? Is there's always the +1. There's always like a perception in consciousness that matters.
Right. And so now when he gets into the point where he can see Metatron, Metatron is sitting in heaven, basically apotheosized, and the rabbis, they call Metatron the little Yahweh, or the little YHWH, the Yadhe Wadhe. And Metatron was allowed to sit as a scribe, writing down all the history of Israel. And he is described after his translation as a primordial angel. And then I have from Genesis, 5:24, where basically the quote is, Enoch walked with God, then Enoch was no more because God took him away. And let's see. Now, Christians during this time took Metatron to be Jesus or Yeshua himself, right? As the one witness of humankind, because basically Jesus is part of God, and they said there couldn't be two gods. So to the Christians, if it was, that heavenly and that high up, and they called him the little Yahweh, that he was essentially equated in the Christian mind to Jesus. So I find that interesting as well.
Well, that makes sense in a Buddhist way as well. Like you would have the physical body, you would have the quote unquote spiritual body, and then you would have the empty body, like the Buddha sort of nature. It's not really a body. It's not even a consciousness. It's just kind of like a ineffable expression of God, you could say, like just one of his qualities in loving kindness. So that's what it would be. It would be the 3 kaya system. So I totally get that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So now we're going to get into the book itself, right? And basically the rabbi ascends, and I said he entered the 6 holes, which were situated within one another. The holes were concentric circles, one within the other. And at the 7th was a door. And they asked Kafskiel, the angel of a higher order who guards the 7th door to heaven, basically, and he sent, God sends Ebed, which is Metatron, to guide him into the 7th door. So once the rabbi gets to the 7th door, he has to plea with this angel to allow him to go further. And that's at the point when Metatron, or Enoch, transformed into Metatron, comes and guides him into the higher realm. And they call Metatron the angel of presence.
This is really interesting because this is something that came up yesterday. Even is that yesterday is in terms of data record, is that like what level are the angels? Like I often think about this. I've discussed it with Teresa. I've discussed it with Nick. I've discussed it with you, Robbie. Is like, what is the hierarchy of the angels? Like, the archangels aren't that high up, but we place a lot of emphasis on them.
Right.
And there are a lot of heterodox texts. I'm not saying you have to believe them, but there are a lot of heterodox texts that might posit that the angels themselves have, especially those ones, have archonic qualities. And so, you know, it's like, who are the archons? Who are
the
you
angels?
know, exactly.
Like, are they the same thing?
Right.
And in a lot of ways, I think that there are different archonic forces on different levels that are angelic forces that are like, you know, basically more building blocks of the universe versus messenger forces.
Yes.
Know? So now, let's see, and so Enoch or Metatron takes the rabbi and shows him the vision of the Merkaba, basically being the chariot of fire or the chariot of light. And this Merkaba is pulled by the four living creatures, which we've talked about before, being the angelic forces with the four wings, with the face of a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle. And what is it in Ezekiel 4:26? It mentions three types of angels found in the Merkaba, being the seraphim, the burning angels of light, which are the highest order that power the motion of the Merkaba. So it's the seraphim that are basically powering the motion of the movement of the Merkaba, right? And the chariot is in constant motion. And the seraphim order, the chariot order, and then the ophanim order are the three different orders. So the seraphim, the chariot, and the ophanim, and all the angels are controlled by the likeness of a man on the throne, being Metatron himself. So, and with these different orders, that's one of the things that Enoch 3 really gets into, is these various orders of the angels and how they are in regard to superiority over one another.
One thing I do want to mention, Metatron, and I think all those other angels, like the Orphanum and stuff, I think they all do fit on the Hermetic Kabbalistic tree.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Metatron is associated with Kether. So just, you know, again, just tying more stuff to the Kabbalah.
Right, right.
No, I think that's a great point, because it's like showing like maybe there's a higher angelic force, or it could be a consciousness. Like you could say it's your own consciousness.
Yeah.
You could say it's like that, like Nick's described it, like that ineffable experience of love.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like that salmon pink that comes down. Like, yeah, that could totally be it.
Right.
It just depends on what you assign.
Yeah. Let's see. Now, when Enoch enters into the seventh realm, right? All the angels instantly put their focus on the rabbi, right? And the angels, they said that they could smell his scent from 365,000 parsangs, right? And basically, they said what smells like a born woman and tastes like a white drop. So here we have the red of the blood and the white. So we have some alchemical stuff going on here. And that white drop is generally referring to semen. And the angels find the scent of the mortals revolting, and they can taste the presence of a mortal in the air, and they find it disgusting. So
that's a very tantric thing. Like you could have the starfire and the semen, you know, in the skull cup.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, and I know like cakes of light, obviously, and all that.
Yeah. And it describes these angels as trembling in an electric motion and light, like they were, and it says they were trembling and shuddering, almost like everything in this realm is literally just in a vibrational state. You know what I mean? Is what I kind of get out of it. And it says God tells. Let's see. Oh, God tells all the angels to close their eyes so Enoch will not be so afraid. And and then this book really gets into the different orders, and we talked about it talks about the seraph being the seraphim, the root of seraphim being the Hebrew word seraph, which is to burn, or the Hebrew seraph, which is a fiery flying serpent. Let's see. It says,
I've often wondered, Robbie, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I've often wondered if the seraphs or the seraphim that are described in the Western literature are the same things as the dakinis described in Himalayan and tantric literature, or the sky dancers.
Right.
Because they are associated with language, they are associated with letters, sounds. Yeah. And they are also associated with secret language, the way they dance, meaning that the way you view the word when the flame is, when you're reading a scroll or whatever, and then the flame is flickering, there's a way that the reflection of the letters look. So that's a secret language, like a Dakini language. I think you and I have discussed that. So, I wonder if there's like a relationship between that, because they are kind of an angelic force. But they're neither Asuric, meaning they're not really demonic, and they're not really Devic either. They're not really of the gods. They're kind of neither nor. It's interesting.
Right. And I believe there's one part in the Bible where Jesus actually appears as a seraphim as well.
Oh.
So, yeah. And it details in the book that these seraphim, right, because of their burning fire, that any mortal who ever laid eyes on one would instantly be incinerated due to its effulgent brightness. And that kind of reminds me of the story of Dionysus when he's born, and Dionysus's mother wants to see the true form of Zeus. And when he takes off all his appearances, his divine effulgent light basically incinerates and turns Dionysus's mother to ash, so
that's very similar to the Shiva story from the Puranas about how he opens his third eye and incinerates Kama. Right. But the sort of situation of why that happens is a little different. Obviously, it's his wife, not his mother, does a spell, basically, uses Tantra to call the god Kama. And so she tells Kama, please go to my husband, make him fall in love with me, so we can, create the universe. And he does, and Shiva is an ascetic, so he doesn't want to be generative. He doesn't want, to put it crudely, he doesn't want an erection. That's kind of the idea. He doesn't want to create the world any more than he already has.
So now the other two classes of angels, the cherubim or the cherubim, are a tetrad of living creatures, which we talked about with the four faces. They're called the winged ones. They have the hands of man and the feet of a calf, with four wings, two up and two down, which reminds me of torsion field very much, and then you have the Ophanim, which are as never sleeping. They watch, they guard the throne of God. And the Ophim in Hebrew is a wheel, and they're called the many-eyed ones, and they carry the throne of God, which these Ophanim remind me of the wheels within the wheels with the eyes that are spoken of in Ezekiel, Let's see. And the Hebrew adds an M on the end of words, like English adds an S on the end of words. So if we're going to say, apples with the S to make it plural, the Hebrew would say the cherub or the cherub M or the cherubim, as mean the difference between the singular cherub and the plural cherubim, I
actually never knew that.
Yeah. And let's see, Metatron has to put the rabbi's soul back in his body because he's so afraid as these angelic forces glare at him. And then it says, after an hour of timelessness, God opened the gates of the Shikina to Enoch.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the gates of and it calls them. It says, these are the gates of understanding, the gates of peace, the gates of wisdom, the gates of strength, the gates of power, the gates of speech, the gates of song. And as this is going on, all of the angels are chanting and singing, "Holy, holy, holy," as these gates of the Shekinah are open for Enoch to view, or open for this rabbi to view at the purview of Enoch. And then it says God shined his light into the rabbi's eyes, and the rabbi, without any conscious effort, he just opened his mouth with a song already coming forth from it in resonance with all the other angels. So he kind of gets subsumed within the vibration and becomes a part of it. When God stares him dead in the eyes,
Well, the eye is the organ of, this book argues Hesed, but we would say in Tantra that it's the organ of Agni, or fire, and fire is the element that watches. Right. Like I even said this in the last episode, but I just think it's interesting to sort of revisit that.
And somebody said, why not Jesus? Why holy, holy, holy? This holy, holy, holy chanting within the Hebrew diaspora goes back before the time of Jesus. So this is kind of a traditional thing that's kind of a long-standing thing within the function of the literature itself. So,
real quick, Jen, you mentioned something about the eyes. And this is kind of like a burnt out thought that I've had before. It's one of my stone thoughts. When it comes to the eyes, you know how like sometimes you'll see people attribute like the red and blue spheres for your eyes, actually, Chesed and Gabor. Mm-hmm. I have actually wondered if that has something to do with going to the two different types of things going on inside your eyes. If you want to look at the red when the sun rises, you get a lot of red light. Mm-hmm. But then when you go into the back of your eyes where it starts to convert into electricity, when we use electronic stuff, you have to worry about blue light. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that has anything to do with it. Well, it's burnt out, but that's like what the fuck?
It changes your consciousness, I think.
Or even depending on where you're using your eye, what kind of light you're producing, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to influence your whole, like, what they, I guess the esoteric health bros call, like, biorhythm or whatever. Like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it changes like the way you feel, the way you interact with reality. Yeah. It's very magical in a way to like have devices that use blue light and sort of change our consciousness to be like more in reciprocal. So we're receiving almost, we're like the feminine thing. We're like receiving the blue light from the device rather than just from the sort of atmosphere. It's some interesting.
Right. Which is why I think, the idea of sun gazing is, kind of I've been doing it for like 20 years. I just, let the sun off to the side because you are receiving, that you are the receiver of that divine light that is the generative force that keeps this reality alive,
That's, I think, the whole reason behind Crowley's Resh, or his book, Liber Resh, is you're supposed to actually be going out like 4 times and staring into like the sun or the sky when you do this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I do think, believe it or not, it's to actually prime your pineal gland in your eyes for certain colors at certain times of the day. That's one of my takes on it.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think that totally makes sense because even when you're doing like your basic, and I've talked to you about this, Nick, is like when you do the Omahum, like the, it's very like middle pillar kind of like but the tantric Buddhist version, you're doing it like you're imagining the white light expanding in a certain way. You're imagining the red light exploding in a certain way. You're imagining the blue light accumulating in a specific place in your body. And then you're kind of like, moving them down into letters, and then you're letting it dissolve. So you're like just in that. I think it just shows like those are like the fundamental, whatever they mean, are the fundamental building blocks of like reality. And so the ways that their input into us, and then also that we interact with them, it matters. It like has some kind of magic, if you want to say like a plus ultra magnetic kind of magical effect. Yeah, I think so.
Well, and now speaking of the building blocks of the universe, right? There's the 72 ineffable names of God. That Enoch also has 72 names, right? And God said it was of my love that I put my names in him and gave him that much power, you know, as far as this representation of humanity. But when you get it multiple times, it says Enoch has 70 names, right? And when you look into this, there's actually the 70 names, which are derived from the Tetragrammaton, as far as the different rearranging letters of the Yahweh. And then it's God himself that calls Enoch youth. So that's 71 names, right? Because he is the youngest entity in the heavens that's been transformed into an angel, right? And then there's the secret name of Enoch, right? Which is the 72nd name of Enoch, which is if you look at that Merkaba, that is that vehicle. And in Israel, they call their tanks Merkabas. But nonetheless, it's the upward facing pyramid with the downward facing pyramid, right? So it's a three-dimensional shape of two pyramids, very alchemical, the fire symbol of fire and the symbol of water, and they compress them together. And this is the Merkaba that Enoch rides around in. And on the different crystalline shelves or the different planes of the Merkaba itself are all these ineffable names that Enoch and Yahweh have. And somewhere on there is this 72nd secret name that if that name is said, it will unmake all of reality. So
we have that exact, almost like to the T exact, multiple stories. There's one from the Bhairava Tantras, very famous. I've said it, I think, on Rejects, so Nick's show, and also like on mine many times, is that like the Time King, Kala Bhairava, he's the ninth, but he's secret. He's fixed in space, and he expands out into the mandala 8 times, but there's really 9.
Right.
So, and then each one also expands outward 9 times. So that's 72, and so on and so forth.
I was just doing that math in my head, dude. I was like, 9 times 8 is 72. And then 9 times 3 is 27, if you want to do the palindrome.
Yeah, yeah.
That's funny. I was just thinking that shit in my head as you said it.
Yeah. And Binah is the 8th, or the 3rd Sefer, excuse me, obviously. And then you have like that relationship with Hod, and then also the relationship with Netzach. And that's like, you know, material, that's like us in material reality, basically. Those 3, like in kind of like if we're looking up at the sun, like we're looking up at Tiferet, yeah, that's us in perception, but we don't really know what the reality around us is at that point. I mean, we might, but you know, I think that for normal people, they wouldn't necessarily understand. You have to be in relationship with the things that you see in the world, and you have to also know their names. So I think that's something that Robby was getting to, is like their secret name. Like, what is that? And is it a 4-letter name like the Yahweh? Is it a 5-letter name? Because you can also write Yahweh with 5 letters.
Right.
And 2 5s is 10. That is the 1 and the 0. So the sort of like the alpha and the omega, if you want to say it like that. But it's also like the transcendental and the immanent. It's kind of like the numinous and the material, you could say, at the same time. It's like the emptiness and like the compassion or the love or the, whatever you want. So I also thought the idea of the love, like he was in God input love into us, or that was what is sort of the thread that connects us. And this is a very tantric idea as well, is that there's this, well, also very holistic, is there's an idea of lamed, mem, dalet. So love is the cause of knowledge, but it's also like as a secret meaning where that can refer to the heart of Eve. But it's not really talking about Eve as in like the primordial ancestor. It's talking about like our kind of history of man. That would be a more Gnostic way to describe it.
Well, and Eve carries that branch from the tree of life when she exits Eden. And I think that branch symbolically is kind of the symbol of what you're referring to.
Jin, did you say love is the heart of knowledge?
Yeah, that's an idea of Path 22.
That is like
Lamed.
Damn, yeah, because like I've said myself, like when I think I have a magical experience, all I feel is love, and when it's over, I do understand things differently.
Yeah,
this is really weird.
Well, it's the pink
really
ray.
like that.
You and I talked about that.
Damn, that's some deep shit to me.
Yeah, it is. No, it is.
Something I wanted to say before when you were talking about the tree, and yet I think Netzach and Hod. It's just my opinion that I do think like those two spheres, kind of like, those two have to start working congruently going up the tree. I think kind of like unraveling. This just sounds silly, but let's say you had like a twist tie and you were holding the middle of it and you started twisting it closed. You kind of have to untwist that. And then if you really think about it, you kind of have like a whole. You'll even have the Masonic arch look. You know what I'm saying? But I think it's like as silly as it sounds. I do think, and even going by my vision separating the white from the black, I even wonder if it's like, again, like if you had a magnet, but somehow it got twisted up and you actually have to separate it and let it become polarity and separate it.
Right.
I do actually wonder if like even stuff to that.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense for like doing like path working, or like I know people love the 7 chakras. Like I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying I don't understand it 100% for me because we use 5. But I think that's also another interesting idea is like this is obviously a 7-gate text. Like they even say very specifically, but we also call the gates that. So call the chakras that. And interestingly, a chakra is a spinning disc. And so we have this idea of the purified spinning disc, which is the Dipta chakra, the shining wheel. And so that is, it can only be a daughter. That's kind of like the interesting idea in Tantra. She's like a complement to what we would call the Vajra Kumara, or the adamantine sun. So I just think that's something really interesting. You have a single point with a spinning wheel. Seems like there's something metaphysical, like a 1 and a 0.
Yeah.
It even starts to sound like the Orphanum in a sense too.
Yeah.
You get them all spinning at once.
Right.
Yeah.
So now at this point, there are 3 angels that come to accuse this rabbi when he's in heaven. And these angels are Uzzah, Azza, and Azael. And they basically say to God, they say, we told you not to make man, right? In the beginning, right? They're upset.
Fucked up.
And, yeah, right? And God answers, he says, he will carry and deliver as his responsibility. And basically, this is why he let man into heaven. And again, the angels say, what business does he have, being in heaven? But some of the fragments, because we're dealing with various fragments that they've kind of pieced together, say that the angels were Malaki or Malaketi and Azazel, who basically taught sorcery to humankind. Let's see, it says that all 3 are agents of evil who accuse man of sins. And basically these are, again, we talked about how Samael was still in the heavens. These are some, and in Enoch, what was it, book 1, we talked about in the 4th heaven where they found the fallen ones. These are, again, references to the fallen ones being in the heavens.
This makes sense. this makes sense from a Puranic layer. I mean, the whole idea of the gods in the Puranas, they are not the gods of the Vedas. It is those are dead corpses. That's even how it's described in Tantra. Like
Husks.
those gods are dead husks. Exactly.
Yeah,
Like Nick,
yeah.
that's it. It's husks.
And it talks about in Enoch 1 how they were dried and kind of frozen, very, very husk like, you know?
I stole that from
Yes.
Eugen, actually. I've heard you say that. That's why I said it. I like how you use that term for that. It's very well said.
So now, Enoch, so within the book, right, it's God says, he says, I delight more in this one than all of you put together, in regard to the human in over the angels in his favor. And he says, he being man will be a ruler over you in the high heavens. So, when the singularity happens and the breath is, inhaled and everything goes back to, this singular, almost nirvana kind of point, essentially will be a higher form than even the archons or the angelic forces within the creation, basically, maybe even we're higher than the creation.
I think that makes sense. I think that makes sense a lot for later mysticism. Like you were saying, like this was compiled maybe in the 300s to 400s. That makes sense. That would have been the earliest Dharani Tantras, the earliest spell text, Buddhist spell text, and there was no real Hinduism then, but Buddhism. So Buddhist spell text, and then so you have the earlier ideas. But then the later ideas, like what was coming out in the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th century, that is where it gets really interesting. Yes, they probably took it a little too far, too aggressive, but I think that you're getting into something fundamental, because I keep thinking of this Buddhist deity, Robby, whenever every time you've been on, is Havajra. So he holds the zodiacs in his skull cup. So we were talking about like the starfire and the seed of man in the skull cup. So in every skull cup, he also holds the sort of zodiac animal of the fixed stars, and he holds 13, interestingly, not just 12, as well as various implements of all the gods, meaning that. And his wife is the she without fixed self. So he is the diamond thunder breath, and she is without fixed self. She's kind of emptiness. Right, exactly what you're saying. Like she is the true Shikina, because she's like, she doesn't have desire. She's not like a scarlet woman. She's like, at this point, she is just empty. Yeah.
And pure.
Exactly. It's just like air. It's like sky, and like looking at the pristine sky.
Right. Now, this is in chapter 5 of the book, and I found this really interesting. And it talks about, since man was ejected from Eden, the Shikina, or the glory of God, it says was dwelling upon a cherub under the tree of life, right? And these bands of angels, these groups, went down to work their will on earth from the Shikina. And the first man and his children were sitting outside the gates of the garden. And this is, I think, is essentially when we get into that old story of Adam and Eve being cast out, and they built the first hinge, and they're basically under the spot in heaven, which could relate to the pole star, as far as you go back far enough. And, we talked about the pole star with Mario. But nonetheless, from that point where Adam and his children were sitting on earth outside the garden, they could see the glowing, bright appearance of the Shekinah in the heavens. And it enfolded the whole world 365,000 times from end to end, which kind of, at the time I was thinking, is that the bit rate of the rendering of the universe? You know what I mean? But the thing was, this light, this effulgent light shining down on the earth, it basically put mankind into a state of purity, where they could not become sick, where they could not they face no ills within the material world, right? And basically it reminded me very much of the Saturnian golden age, when nature took care of humanity, and like everything was bright and golden and pure. And it basically came to the point where the offspring of the humans began to sin so much and began to worship representations of the god, and this upset Yahweh, and he basically he pulled himself from the earth, which took away the light of the Shikina shining down on the humans. And this is when humans began to be able to get sick and be started having these detrimental things, like what is it, Ahura Mazda talks about all the miscellaneous 999,000 demons that intercede and cause all the sicknesses and the deaths. It's almost like the Shekinah light was holding off all of these forces of Khorasan from entering in and kind of perturbing the existence of the human. You know what I mean? And then it was taken away.
So that reminds me again of our discussion on Shukra, or the planet Venus, and how that is he was the deity who gave us immortality. So like even Nick was describing that kind of relationship between Mercury and Venus, or Hod and Netzach. They have to kind of be moving. It kind of has to be dynamic, can't be kind of any blockages. And what makes you have blockages is your kind of like your impulses and your desires. So you have to, keep it all together.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, super. I thought that it's interesting because that is how it's sort of described. But then Shiva goes away to the carnal ground of his own choice. So you could say God dies of his own desire.
Yes.
But she's still here. She just maybe forgets who she wants to be, or what she's meant to be doing.
See, I almost relate that with the Leviathan, in regard to the feminine personification crystallizing into reality. And she's here and she kind of forgot. But at the same time, she is and exists within all, But I found this part here. It says, and the humans brought down the sun and the moon and the planets and the constellations, placing them on idols right and left, to attend the idol, as the planets do the Holy One. And basically God got upset that we were starting to worship the stars and the various idols that were brought forth out of that,
Interestingly, the planetary Navgraha worship has died out largely in India, except in a few temples in the south. So only Shaivite temples will have the full 9. We use 9 deities in Tantra for the 9 planets. But so basically it is lower, but on a popular level, and I think this is also true with popular astrology, is that a lot of the people do worship planets, because the worship isn't just doing like a puja or saying the name of the planet over and over as like a mantra, but worship of the planets is like believing they're real. To steal something from Nick.
Yes, I was just going to say that. Just believing they're real in the story, in my opinion, does. And attributing it to your world.
Yeah, do they control you, or are they mutable? Are they changeable? Is it like a transmutation?
Right. One of the things I found interesting, that Elijah is mentioned, and in Jewish mystical writings, Elijah is equal to Enoch. And I think within Christian metaphysical writings, you will have Elijah equated with Jesus in some cases. So again, we have this diametric kind of connection between Enoch and Jesus and Elijah in that sense, Let's see. Uh, so the gates of heaven open to Metatron. 300,000 gates, love and mercy and wisdom, Shekinah power. Let's see. Enoch receives the blessing from the Most High, and grows to the size of all reality, and has wings placed on him, and receives. So yeah, Enoch basically grows to the size of all of physical reality, has wings placed on him, and receives 365 eyes in chapter 9. Let's see. There's one of the things I want to get to in here, because I'm only on chapter 10, and we got 48 chapters.
Oh.
So yeah, this book 3 ended up. So I have this notebook, and book 1 and 2, my notes took up half, and book 3 took up the rest of the book. So Enoch 3 is a little bit longer than the other ones.
This is like a year. It's going to take to finish this.
Ha 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 ha.
All right.
So let's see. It says in chapter 10, God places Metatron on a throne as ruler in the 7th, and it calls it a hole, right? Which is interesting. And builds Metatron a throne made of the same energetic forces as the one that God sits on himself. And God puts a blanket with stars upon it over Metatron, and announces him in all realms as his servant, and over all the angels, except the Yadi Wahe, right? So now this Yadi Wahe, they are 8 beings that are outside of the angelic orders, and they are highly ranked, which God uses as his own personal counsel. And he instructs all the angels to question Metatron and no longer bring their questions to him. And Metatron is given the final word on all decisions as if it were God's. And he sets Metatron over all the storehouses of heaven, being the storehouse of rain, the storehouse of dew, and even the guff itself that contains all the souls of humanity that will ever come into existence.
I wanted to let you continue, Robby, but really quick, I want to say the blanket and the veil symbolism I thought was very interesting, as well as it relates to your story from a little bit previous of the sort of like where God's light was dimmed, you could say, or the Shekinah's light specifically was dimmed in our reality. I think that you could also understand that as like I was thinking in my mind, like ignorance, like that's what we consider like the first sin in Buddhism, because like we don't know what the world is, but that's not necessarily our fault. But if you know, then there's more karmic implication. So ignorance is kind of like the worst kind of sin, but then it's also like one of the hardest too.
Yeah, yeah. Now at this point, the rabbi talks about God reveals all the secrets to Metatron. He says, all the mysteries of the Torah, all the secrets of wisdom, the deep mysteries of the perfect law, revealed the thoughts of all living beings, all the secrets of the universe, all the secrets of creation. Before man thought a thought in secret. So Enoch or Metatron, he's talking to the rabbi, and he says, before man thought a thought in secret, I saw it. Before man made a thing, I watched it. And there was nothing in the depth of the world which was hidden from me. So it's kind of a timeless, seeing all time encapsulated into a singular whole.
Makes me think like having the experience of like second sight or all-seeing eye.
Yeah, yeah. Almost like he becomes the eye of providence.
Yeah,
in a sense. Yeah.
Very well said.
So then God puts a crown on him, calls him the lesser Yadhevahe, and God made garments affixed with lights upon it, garments of glory, and a robe of honor, and a crown of royalty with 49 stones worth like orbs of the sun. So you have 49, which is basically the whole 7 times 7, being the spiritual perfection, and then
Star rubies, maybe.
Yeah.
That's very Jyotish.
Yeah.
Like, I know Crowley wrote about it, but it's very common Jyotisha thing. The stone of the sun is a ruby.
Yeah.
And so if you're using it in a tantric way, you'd want a star ruby.
Right.
So I just think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. And let's see, splendor all the way to the four. So basically his splendor is shown all the way to the 4 corners of creation and through the 7 heavens. And then God writes with his finger as a flaming pin on Metatron's crown the letters by which heaven and earth were created. Letters flashing out time after time like lightning. And basically, I think this is the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet that he inscribed upon the crown. And all of the highest princes and the lowest angels trembled in sight of Metatron crowned. They shook and trembled in fear. And then, you have within the Zohar, talking about Samael is the ruling angel over the Satans or accusers. And Samael, interestingly, they talk about in this text being the angel over Rome itself.
Well, that makes sense, because what would be the most clipolithic activity to do at Gevurah would be to accuse other people of sins that you yourself were perhaps also guilty of.
Yes. Mirroring. Yes. And let's see. It says the angels of the rulers of the world. Gabriel is the angel of fire. And Borad El is the ruler who controls hail. And Ruchael controls the wind. Brakael controls the lightning. Zahaphael controls winds of the storm. Rahomael controls the thunders. Rahashael controls the earthquakes. Chaalgiel controls the snow. Todel controls the rain. Shemshiel controls the planets. Rahatiel controls the constellations. And it just goes on and on and on with all these different angels that are basically controlling all of these forces. And they all bow down and fell to the ground when they saw Metatron crowned. And they could not look at Metatron because of the majestic glory on his head.
I just wanted to add that Nick brought up something really interesting in the chat about how giving names to God actually de-glorifies God. I think this is a very deep, but also it appears in the literature, but it's never said explicitly. There's always kind of an implication. It's implied.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to kind of get it, and then you're like, okay, the name is not to be misused. It's not to be really spoken. Maybe it's not even a name. Maybe it's just a sound. Maybe it's perception. Maybe it's a color, or something we see. It's not really a thing. It doesn't really exist in our kind of reality. So I thought that was really interesting, just to go with your point, Robbie.
Yeah. Well, and you go back into the Hebrew philosophy itself, and the name of God was never to be spoken aloud. And it was, inscribed in the Holy of Holies. And there was this whole idea that by saying it, like you were saying, you took power away from it, in the sense that it was, and that was the thing really, though, is what it was about, was that name that is the representation. It cannot even begin to encompass what that thing is. And by saying that name, you're misleading and thereby kind of defrauding what the thing itself is.
100%. This is like a very, if you look at like the Buddhist discourses from like Nepal and Tibet from like the 8th till 17th century, which is the most famous period, this is what they're talking about. This is what they're fighting with the Indians about. This is what I fight with the Indians about. This is, this is the thing. It's like Shiva is the mind, if you really understand. It's really the mind. You're looking at yourself in a way. You're just not at pristine consciousness, at turquoise consciousness.
Right.
But that's really what it is. It's like, it's not, it's God, but it's, it's something a little closer to our reality, which is like you and your experiences and your perceptions and your reality and all of that. So
it becomes very hermetic in a sense.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the point of a lot of religion, is like to remind you that like there are these hermeneutic kind of ideas that you can use to like gain further understanding, but you have to kind of like let go of what you sort of held fixed in reality. Right. And so that's kind of the problem with a lot of like very fixed religious things, is that people, it's not that I think it's bad, it's that I think that people like priests, all of that, they forget like what the real purpose is. So they just perform it as like a rote outer. You see a lot of this with a lot of magicians. Like, I'm not saying like everyone, but a lot of them do this, is that they'll do the performance. It's like the words, the sword, the robe, all that. It's like, that's not really what it's about. It's about like, you have to like really mean it. You have to understand the things. You have to, do the work, as the kids say. So I think that's the point, is that it's the work, it's the doing, it's the process. It's not it's not just the outer ritual. Right. And I think that would be a problem with like the priests. Like, often you talk about them.
Yeah. So now at this point, Metatron is transformed into fire, and it says his muscles into flaming fire, his bones into coals of juniper wood, the light of his eyelids into hot flames, all of his limbs into wings of burning fire, and the whole into glowing fire. On his right, flames burned and divided, and on his left wooden staves of burning fire. The winds of the storms and tempests blowing, with roaring thunder in front and behind, accompanied by earthquakes. So, just the visualization of this scene is very, very, if before modern entertainment and everything, I would imagine this would get people shook,
Shook.
In the sense of the word, the true sense of the word,
No, it's a comic book. That's what it kind of reminds me of. Like, it's very like, it's not a post-internet comic book, but like maybe you could say like 60s, 70s, like kind of that silver age era. And like, I could see it, like when you're talking about like the earthquakes, like that's stuff we visualize.
Oh yeah.
Like it's called the outer disharmonies. Like the lightning, the fire, like, we use all of that. Like, you use all of those things as tools. So there's like a lot of Zoomers are talking about, I think it's kind of weird, but I'm a millennial, I'm a little older. So but the kids are going to, do their things, and they use anime now. Yeah. Something that they're often talking about to do like magical visualization.
Right.
Kind of weird, but it is kind of interesting.
Hey. And so, I don't even mean to get off topic, but I've been watching all the Star Wars in order, and I'm on the very last. It's called Visions, and they took like some of the top animators, but the third one in that Vision series, it has a lot of this just phenomenal quaking and shaking and fire and like sparks, and like it, I thoroughly enjoyed the third one of the Vision series of Star Wars, which I think kind of equates to some of this like inherent kind of like ascended kind of God form material,
Yeah, I think that this makes a lot of sense in terms of like what we were talking about at the very beginning, is just like, you're not God, but there are these like as I called them, the outer disharmonies, or these things outside of you that you're the cause of, maybe an earthquake, lightning, fire, all of that. Those are like your emotions, but they're also these kind of chaotic elements that you have to kind of reconcile or rectify. That's an interesting kind of word for Robby, and you have to kind of bring those elements back in.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely something that is missing in a lot of modern media, as far as the things that they seek to project into people's minds. It's very homogenized, interestingly. But
fiction is the greatest magic.
Yeah, fiction is the greatest magic. The storyteller, the bard, the one that, opens the door within the fire so that you can see the mystic. It's definitely. And that's kind of, us as podcasters, we are kind of the modern day storytellers.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So now in chapter 18, it establishes the order of the angels, and it says there are 70 angels, with 2 angels over them being Michael and Gabriel. So then you have basically the sacred numbers of 70 and 72 incorporated, right? And it says, and there was in regard to the Merkaba, one of the angels that was basically lifting the Merkaba so that it could move, he only used 3 fingers, and it was a measure. It was a thing of measure in regard to time space, I guess. But then it talks about Sofad He Yad He Wad He. And this Sofad He Yad He Wad He is he who kills, he who controls the books of the dead, and everyone's name is written in the book of the dead by him. And this Sofad He Yad He Wad He, who controls the books of the dead, he also is the one who makes alive, the life giver, the Lord over the book of life, who writes everyone the Most High, who is allowed to live into the book of life. And one stands on a wheel of tempest, and the other on the wheel of the wind of the storm, and both in kingly garments, in mantles of majesty, and both their bodies are full of eyes, and both appear as lightning. Yeah,
Eyes and
right.
lightning.
So,
especially over water, you'd have a very that's very and Nick and I have even talked about this on like the rejects many times. It's that's kind of like where perception happens.
Yes.
Like it's a part of Hesed that people don't. They just think, oh yeah, the outer is just mercy, it's just this. But no, that's where you're seeing things for the first time, and you're kind of like, that's why it's also lightning. Yeah. It's also like that kind of lightning strike, that very Edison sort of cliche. That's also why we think of it like that. Like Benjamin Franklin with the key and the lightning strike. Like it's an idea too. Right.
And yeah, that early Benjamin Franklin idea of him discovering quote unquote lightning, lightning's something that's, you go back to the ancient ascended masters calling down lightning. Some suppose that Zoroaster was calling down lightning and mistakenly, fried himself. There were Roman emperors that were trying to call down lightning, and they did kill themselves in the process. So, this thing of the discovery of lightning, it's inherent, this fire that, has been talked about, played with, used all through eons, it's, but I do find it interesting of equating Benjamin Franklin with this sort of, alchemical fire from heaven that is softer than water and harder than stone,
Well, I thought it was really interesting, Robby, that because, there's something pristine, like we talked about lightning, like there's like a color quality that's like clear, but it's kind of bluish, but it can also appear as pink. Like they supposedly recently discovered spectral lightning in 2014. So that's pink lightning that we can actually see supposedly, and you can only capture it on these kind of spectral cameras. But there's supposedly like currents running throughout. Anytime there's a storm, there's these kind of horizontal kind of arrows, you could say, of light that are running concurrently to the horizontal, or the vertical lightning. So I think that's, I think there's a lot we don't know about it. I think that, yes, you can take it in that more Tartarian way, like, oh, it's plasma energy. But, in Buddhism, we really love the Vajra. Like, we really love lightning. So we would say that it's actually something that's always present in the world. And it's something you have to cultivate in yourself first, and then you can learn to call it down, which is just your pristine consciousness. So, like, yes, it can exist outwardly as a phenomena, but it should always be internal as like a sort of consciousness process. Like something that's always pristine. It's like a dragon. It's always moving, but it's always kind of like clear or ice or turquoise or whatever. I don't know. Just an interesting idea.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm trying to scan over the notes here to...
Oh no! No apologies neither, Robbie, and thanks for
yeah. So no, it's all good. It's all good. Now I'm skipping ahead here to chapter 26, and it talks about the prince of the seraphim. They had a face like an angel, a body like an eagle, his beauty like sparks, like the light of Venus. The light from the eyebrows are 7 times brighter. This is where the chismel, which is the fiery substance which makes the pillars on which the world rests. It is the substance or the life form that illuminates Ezekiel's chariot vision. The seraph on his head as a large... the sapphire on his head is as large as the entire universe, and body full of eyes like stars. And he is called Seraphiel Yadhevadhe, who is the Prince of Peace and rules over the flaming seraphim, teaches them to sing, praise, proclaim the beauty and the majesty of the King, with 4 faces and 6 wings. And then they call them seraphim because they burn, which we had talked about. And then there's this discussion of the writing table of Satan, which I find very interesting. And it says that every day Satan, Samael, the prince of Rome, and Dubael, the prince of Persia, basically write down all the sins of Israel, which they hand over to the seraphim to present to the Holy One himself, so that he should eliminate and destroy Israel from the world, right? And it says, but the seraphim receive the tablets from Satan, and they burn them in a burning fire, so that the tablets should not come before the Holy One on the throne of judgment. And it basically says that Satan and Samael cannot approach the throne of God, and the seraphim are assigned to take their complaints and burns as and basically they take their complaints and burn them, as God does not wish to punish Israel. So I found that interesting within the text itself,
Just very interesting, Robbie, sorry to interrupt, from a tantric perspective, just because that we consider it like the liturgical words are to be burned in the fire. That's how to make them primordial again. That's how to like rectify the name, put it back together.
Right.
You have to burn them in the fire. So just I thought it was, as we're saying, this is an earlier kind of mystical idea, but also relating to the medieval, also relating to contemporary magic for sure.
Right. And then I have a note here that Samael, right? He's called the host of poison. He's a fallen angel. He's called the angel of Rome, the angel of death, but he is still a servant of God, and he is chief of the fifth heaven. So back to, the left hand of God, essentially,
There's also an interesting idea that Ketu, the snake, or the tail, of the dragon, the smoky tail, he sometimes pretends to be Mars. So in a tantric way, we would say that like he's still on, like the serpent is still on the tree because he's still like in the astrological sort of sense, he's still there. So we, like that temptation is not like fixed in time. That like that story of Genesis, it's like it moves through space and time because people believe it.
Right.
So like the temptation or whatever, like the serpent's always there.
Yeah.
Tempt us into like drawing from the flame. That's sort of how I interpret it.
Right. Well, and I've even seen that within ancient Mayan philosophy that we're actually devoured by the serpent, and the processing through the digestion of the serpent is the movement of time space in our lifetime, and then we basically exit the reality, when we're defecated back into the pleroma.
Defecated. I like that.
Well, what other word am I going to use? It's like
that was perfect, Robby.
Yeah,
it was so poetic.
Hey, I try.
Yeah.
I got kids. I try not to be too crude.
That was well.
Yeah, because there was a day, where hey, I was worse than a sailor. So,
I'm sure.
But I'm getting to be an old man, so I try to be a little better.
Maybe you just got tired of using the same words.
I know.
Maybe that's what it was.
Well, and the more words you have, the more descriptive you can be with things, and and it's funny because anyway, I'll just keep going. Let's see. So now chapter 27 discusses Wad Wariel, who is the keeper of the book of records, and he is above all the seraphim. He rules over the treasures of the books of the records, or the books of remembrance. He's an angelic scribe that is fluent in reading and writing, and he reads the book in the house of justice. He curries all the writings and brings the books of the records to the Holy One, and the Lord takes them from his hands and gives them to the scribes. And for every word going out of his mouth, an angel is created.
This goes along with the idea of the Shikina in a tantric way, is that the singular goddess produces all 64 through light. It's like an expression of light, so they're all her, even if they don't know that they're her, or they're maybe not supreme like her, but they're like worldly expressions, you could say.
Yeah. So now back to that Star Wars I was talking about in Visions. It was called the twins, right? And here in the book of Enoch, they talk about these two twins, right? And they're called Yad-An and Karashin, which are the watchers and the holy ones. And they are greater than any of the heavenly children. Their face is a reflection of the brilliance of the Shikina. They are two twins, and they bring to the ground those who are proud. The books of the living and the dead are opened in front of him, and all are quaking and afraid. They are in awe, and they shake. The two pairs of angels basically holding all of angelic power, and sometimes they are seen as a large group of angels, but they are always represented in pairs, which is interesting.
Well, it's very Tomiel, right? Like from the Clipolithic tree, like it's the twins, right? And so I was just even thinking, like when you were narrating, because it's the first time I've really heard someone else speak that story. I've read it, but it didn't really click for me. But when you said it, it did. Is that you have to actually kind of know this like heterodox Jewish mysticism to understand a lot of the Clipolithic ideas, like where they're coming from, at least, like why they derive like those, like the twins. Like that's not a normative biblical idea, right? Like that has to come from somewhere.
Well, within the zodiac, you have Gemini, you have Castor and Pollux. There is a belief by some people. I think it's based on the apocryphal book of Thomas, that Jesus was actually a twin with Thomas, whose name means twin, and that there's this whole idea, and this goes back into ancient sacrifice and the cult of the twin, where they would have two children and they would keep one hidden, and they would raise one up as a leader, and then they would assassinate him in front of everyone. And then, they would basically have the 3 days of rest, very much like the sun getting into Nimrod worship. And then after the 3 days, they would resurrect and bring forth this second twin. As the resurrected, God King man. So the twin is, when you start looking into the ideas of twins, there's some very interesting stuff to find.
The twins really interesting because I feel like this idea of 13, 22, 4 has come up like a lot in this episode. And I think that those are very interesting Kabbalistic numbers, especially looking at their cosmology.
Yeah. So now when we get into chapter 31, they speak specifically on the ideas of mercy, justice, and truth. And Metatron says that when the Lord is on the throne of judgment, justice is standing on his right, and mercy is standing on his left, and the truth is in front of his face. And for judgment of mankind, truth is in front of his face for the judgment of mankind. And when man falls upon his face, all the angels of destruction are fearful, and they shake before him. But these forces on the sides of the throne, when God is upon the throne, being justice and mercy, being the left and the right, I think we're really getting into the idea of the pillars here.
I think so.
Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff within this that I thought pillars and Kabbalah. That's another reason why we go back to Kabbalistic ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fundamentals. And like I want to say,
Right.
There's also an astrotheological layer that also obviously aligns perfectly with the Kabbalistic idea, because you could say, like, in a gross way, maybe it's not like the true meaning, but you could say, like, okay, that's Jupiter. He's talking about the truth. Okay, that's Yesod, so it's the moon. You could say, like you could make a astrotheological
Chart.
Chart from what he's saying, but you could also apply it to the Kabbalistic tree. I think that's what's interesting about the three of us together specifically, is because we kind of do look at it like that. And a lot of people are like, yeah, they're not hearing it, but I think hearing us discuss it, I think that's what makes it really interesting.
Right. And I think also when you look at the ideas of mercy and justice, the essential fulcrum that both of those balance on and basically create equity within is the truth itself. So truth is directly in front of God's face as he judges, where mercy and justice are on the sides. So it's essential for mercy and justice to be able to function, to be dealing with the truth itself.
Absolutely. And like even what you said is very metaphysically profound, very Kabbalistically profound, because you have justice is the 22nd path. So Nick and I spoke about this at the very beginning. So it's very interesting to come back all the way around. You would say the expression of the light is through the goad of like Hod, but the path between Hod and Giver is blocked. So it has to go a different route.
Right.
So it's like coming around, and it has to like the motion, like Nick was talking about, like the twist tie. That's kind of what it has to do. It kind of has to twist tie all the way around back to where the original pathway is, which is that 22nd path. So it's like the light. Where is it looking? Yes, you could say it's at Tifereth, or you could say it's like looking past, and it's looking at Jupiter or Hesed. So yeah, it's like the heart of Hesed is the spark of glory, is the spark of splendor. This is a very common Kabbalistic idea, is that those two things must always work together. And then you're saying like truth. Well, that is very 49. That's very like, it's very Liber 49. That's very Babylon daughter. That's like, that's sort of that path of the truth is like, comes from the moon or comes from Yesod. So everything that you're saying, Robby, is very like, it's hitting a lot of things for me because I often think about this figure, as I think is the Nuria, and this like kind of daughter figure who's kind of like not really the mother, and she's not bound by the conventions so much, but she's more in complement to the sun. So it's again very Sizgi, very like divine twins. But obviously, because I'm Buddhist, I take it more as like empty. Like I don't think it's like it's not the people like in the heavens. Like sure, yeah, that can be true too, but I take it more as like it's a conceptual idea, like a story, like a magical story.
Right. For you to gain higher understanding of how things move and work within the realm that you exist within.
That's right. Because really, like, to bring it back to something you said, it's love. It's like it's like that's the little med. That's what the Hebrew letter is even talking about. It's like you have to like let things go, love them. Not don't grasp lightning too hard. You just want to like kind of go with the flow, and then you kind of can let it go when you're ready.
Yep. Right.
So that's like the kind of the idea.
So now, in chapter 33, it gets into the angels of mercy, peace, and destruction. And these angels are by the throne of judgment. And it says that now, much like truth was in front and the pillars on the side, right? With the angels of destruction, on the left-hand side, you have mercy. And on the right-hand side, you have peace. But the thing balancing mercy and peace is destruction itself, right? And it says that there is one scribe beneath him, one scribe above him. The seraphim surround the throne on all sides with walls of lightning, and the Ophanim surround them all with burning staves. So there's this essential function of creation and destruction here in regard to mercy and peace and maintaining those factors. Certain things must be destroyed for the creation, essentially.
This is really interesting because I'm sure like this is interesting for Nick too, is that Lurius didn't write like his book for like hundreds of years later. So he was talking about a secret path between Binah and Hesed. So very much like this sort of like 90-degree triangle that you're talking about, like peace, destruction, and mercy. Like that would be Gevurah, Binah, and Hesed.
Yep.
But like the tree at this time didn't even reflect this kind of like more secret understanding. So I think that's actually really interesting.
Let's see. Try to wrap it up here. And granted, going through all this information, there's not enough time here for us to cover all the chapters. I'm just trying to cover some of the stuff that kind of stood out as I was going through it. And when you get to the end of the book, the very last chapter, which is chapter 48, you get one chapter that seems to be in the vernacular, and then there's 3 editions after it. So there's actually a 48A, a 48B, a 48C, and a 48D. I think 48C sounds the most unlike the rest of the book. But again, what you're having here is a compilation of ideas through time. And it's very much, if you go through the Talmud, essentially you have the core idea in the center, and then the rabbis will write on the exterior of the pages and build out different ideas based around the central idea. So I think that's kind of what you have going on here. But the whole idea of the last chapter is that these angels are still upset that a human was allowed into the divine realm. And basically, God says, he loves man more than all the angels, and they're basically just going to have to deal with it.
I mean, this is like you see this a lot. I think when when I was on Rejects with Heidi and Nick and Lisa and JJ, and when we've done Mario, you and I, Robbie with on Nick's show many times, and just like there's so many competing theories in modern magic. Like there's all the everybody has their idea. They have their idea of like how the cosmos works. Is it fixed? Is it not fixed? Is it is it infinite in its expansiveness? And I think traditional religion is exactly the same. It's like competing theories of reality. And so, I think that literalism is really not your friend when you're looking at like this historical stuff, because then I think you get too caught up maybe in the like minutiae, the minute angles, you could say, of physical. Yeah, exactly. Instead of looking at it like as a broader mythological, presentation.
Conceptual.
Yeah, it's very conceptual. Exactly. You get me, Robbie.
Yeah. But after going through all these 3 books of Enoch and seeing the difference between the Ethiopic, the Slavian, and the Hebrew, they all maintain the consistent idea of Enoch becoming translated into the heavens and becoming, the little Yahweh, or the right hand, God, hand of God, and basically, they're consistent with that. It's just a matter of the presentation, and how each culture essentially affects the book itself.
Well, I think that's an interesting idea, right? Because like in Central Asia, they clearly say that we're not stuck at the right hand. We're not that's not where we want to go. We want to go like much higher. We want to if we can go out of the cube, that's where we're going.
Right.
So, right, like that's the idea. It's not to get like locked into at least those ones. Like those were just like mid-tier Sephira, right? Like I know everybody's like, whoa, those are like the the apotheosis, but also no, also you can go higher. I think it's totally possible, and I think that it's don't be locked in.
Yeah. Well, and it's, when you get into, what is it, Kether, and being the throne, the high throne, even in the book of Enoch, it talks about this force that's essentially responsible for the power of all of creation itself, that God puts even higher than the throne itself. So, the fractal, it echoes into other dimensional realities, higher than and lower than itself.
Absolutely. And I think that that's also like we've done a lot of, especially when I'm on Rejects, I do a lot of numerology, or at least a more Hebrew kind of like tree version. And I think that you see this idea, even the 5 and the 7, which we discuss on this episode, is are there 5 chakras? Are there 7 chakras? Are there 9 chakras?
Are there 72?
That's right. That's right. Like what is the finale? What is the terminus of expression?
Right.
And so I do think that there are so many competing ideas.
Yeah.
Rather than, it's not like one cosmology is necessarily superior, but it's like, what do you choose to believe?
Yeah. Well, and I think that, you look historically and how all these cultures have affected the different philosophical ideas, but then you come up to the Rosicrucians, and you come up to Aldous Huxley basically writing the perennial philosophy. And there has been a chain of certain philosophical ideas that try to take all of these systems and make a singular system out of it.
Yeah, they've you can see this a lot with post-war magic, and even not even that, Theosophy definitely was the we'll call it the modern foundations of this, but it obviously started earlier. Then modern magic, then you have I read a Stephen Flowers book. He has a whole, it's the Lords of the Left-Hand Path. I know it sounds like Mr. Edgelord. It really wasn't. It was him talking. He does a whole chapter on Tantra. Okay, he's Tantra, and then he's citing the Tantra it's from. Yep. Then I'm looking up the citation that he's not even citing the Tantra, he's citing Evola, who then I go look up. Evola's not citing the Tantra either. He's citing his interpretation. So it's do you believe the thing? Do you believe the source text or like the story around it?
Right. And again, that's why the Catholic Church had to create the idea of the canon with the Council of Nicaea and basically put all these ideas, compartmentalize them as to, was Jesus God? Was Jesus a man? Was he part God, part man? Like, and establish, the truism, the things that are heresies. So, and that's something that forces through all of time have tried to do is homogenize these ideas.
Well, I think that's the, if I'm going to criticize Rome in any way, maybe in a more esoteric way, if they're kind of like we'll say like they represent like the old, like okay, well, so I'll use your cosmology. I'll borrow it. It'll be a true chaos magician, Robby. I'll say that it's the fallen woman. So the church is like the Babylon. Right. That makes sense because in Tantra, she's always crook-backed. She's always a little crooked. She's always, leans a little one way or the other. It's never in balance. It's always a little off kilter. And so that makes perfect sense to me. Like they would be like very right-handed where they would be like, this is the text. This is it. You cannot believe anything else. Right. This is our structure. This is our institution. And then they would also be like very left-handed. And they'd be like, oh, let's put ideas into the ether. Let's change reality around us. It doesn't have to necessarily even be like they're thinking of magic. It just, them going out in public.
Yeah, and any time you take and try to create a rigid system that has no exceptions, you're going to create things like the Protestants coming out of Catholicism. 100%. And the Protestant, you look at the word and it simply means to protest because they are having a problem with the way that it's being used and represented as it became more and more corrupted, selling of indulgences, et cetera, et cetera. So you have this natural waveform where rigidity, the fluidity, the rigidity, and it just, if you get caught up in the rigidity of any one of these forms, you become crystallized in the movement and you can no longer see the overall flux and influx and how, it affects things through time.
That was a really amazing point, Robby. It just is like I think this whole episode has been like very plus ultra, very magnets. I know he loves the magnets. It's just like, it's very polarities. If I'm going to say like I have a magical like cosmology, I worship the polarities, like that lightning. That's what I like. I don't, the fixed things. I think those things are the traps.
Yeah. Nice.
I would agree with that.
So sorry, Nick, please go.
Actually, I would agree with that. This is, again, the vices and the virtues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys both so much. I'm sorry, Nick, I didn't let you plug at the very beginning. I realized that, and Robby, and no, I mean, because like it is your channel. I should let you plug and do.
But it's your show though.
But thank you both so much for like doing this series with me. It was my first Robby Marx series, hopefully not my last. And obviously I'll continue to work with Robby and obviously Nick on the rejects, and I love doing that. And so thank you both so much for coming on to party with me and Book of Enoch. I've learned so much, Robby. Really appreciate it, and really a great finale. So thank you, Nick, for hosting it.
Of course.
For sure.
Awesome.
And you guys can definitely plug now, I'm saying.
Okay. You can go, Robby.
Yeah, if anybody's interested in checking out my other stuff, you can go to my link tree, which is RMARX, and that'll pull up my website, my podcast, my social media, my Patreon, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. Okay, Nick, please go.
Yes, the Occult Rejects, obviously, on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and all major podcasts. And for the people that are listening to it live, episode 1 and 2 will actually drop on this channel next week. So you get to catch up, kind of. Yeah, since it's part 3 out of nowhere. So
sweet.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Jen, for allowing me to jump on. I always love hearing from Robby. So thank you. I really appreciate this.
No, thank you.
I learned a
Nick.
lot from both of
I
you.
appreciate it. So it was just a great collaboration. I'm really proud of the work I've done, especially lately with Rejects and on my own show with Robby. So this is a big part of it. So thank you both, and to many more.
Yeah. Thank you both. I appreciate it. It's always a good time.
Yes.